that so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous singing air gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
May we pray. O God of our fathers, who has truly blessed America more bountifully than we should expect, I ask that you bless the purpose of our president and our former president. Bless our governor and our state and national leaders who work so hard to lead our state and our nation. Bless our guests here today from within Georgia, our guests from other states and from other countries, including our distinguished guest from the Netherlands. Help us to all adopt and live by the ideals of President Roosevelt, to particularly encourage all people of all ability to be more compassionate, courageous, and filled with conviction to make our state and nation a better place. One of Georgia's most beloved personalities was Graham Jackson Sr. He died in January. I know they're here because I've already seen them. There they are. Thank you very much.
Jackson of Atlanta, Georgia, retelling a story told only once before to Miss Ella Mae Thornton, librarian of the state of Georgia, on April 9th.
Quiet like some sweet day, I'm just going home. Father's waiting too. Lots of folk gathered there.
Do with himself, seemingly. All anybody could do was just think about the loss of their best friend. But as all around the piano, and for 2 straight hours, I sat there and just played everything beautiful that I could think of that I'd ever played. Sat quietly and just listened. In the end, I did not seem to feel so terribly sad as I had felt, and the others looked as if their hearts were not so heavy. But in those few hours, everything sank into my heart and soul, so that I shall never forget any of it. All of it read into a pattern of beautiful music. A few nights later in Atlanta, not long before day, I left my bed and went to my piano. I couldn't stay away from it. Hey, Roosevelt's own melody. How sweet is the air. To see that, that's one thing that I'll always remember. It kept running through my mind all the time. Nothing lost or gained, no more better pain, no more.
Thank you. It is now my pleasure to present to you Thomas W. Starlin, who is the chairman of the FDR Warm Springs Memorial Advisory Commission, and he is one of the original charter members of the Warm Springs Memorial Commission. Mr. Starlin.
Well, you might say that I am the oldest, and why I am the charter member is because I outlived all the rest of them. We want to welcome you to this beautiful and Governor Miller is here. You'll hear from him in a few minutes. And ceremony day, the Little White House Commission his charge of the program, and we always look forward to it. Now this time, because it was the 50th time to introduce our advisory committee individually because of the time, but I would like for the advisory committee to please stand. Thank you.
The Great Depression seemed to verify Karl Marx's prediction that capitalism would be destroyed by its own contradictions. Hitler and Mussolini joined. We would be better off to recall FDR. This is change, but the spirit in which we tackle our problems abides. The spirit of FDR, that exuberant confidence in affirmative democratic government, that unremitting concern for the average man, woman, and child, that unfaltering dedication to individual freedom, that joy in battle against entrenched and selfish privilege, that ringing declaration that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, that spirit.
Thank you very much. It is. Sorry. I apologize. My mom didn't notice that mix-up.
Well, it is a privilege to be here. Mr. President, Governor Miller, and all of our friends. Being here has been so very important to me and to the simplicity and earthiness of his ideas. I'm lucky to have been here at Warm Springs before. Exquisite legacy. The man who came here to learn how to walk, but instead learned so much about life, is still inspiring. It is wonderful to be here with my family, my brothers, my sister, my cousins, my nephews, my daughter. We had the opportunity to attend services last Sunday past the communion rail, and anticipating a embarrassing leap, the minister came forward and opened the gate for her, which is called an Economic Bill of Rights, which contains not FDR's contract with America, but a ringing articulation of America's contract with ourselves. I'd like to read a little bit from it for you today, because it moved me so to hear her. It is our duty now to begin to lay the plans and determine the strategy for the winning of a lasting peace, and the right of free speech, free press, free worship, trial by jury, freedom from unreasonable searches and seizures. They were our rights to life and liberty. As our nation has grown in stature, the stuff of which dictatorships are made. In our day, these economic truths have become accepted as self-evident. We have accepted, so to speak, an economic which will give him and his family a decent living. The right of every businessman to enjoy good health. The right to adequate protection from the economic fears of old age, sickness, accident, and unemployment. The right to a good education. All of these rights spell security, and after this war is won, we must be prepared to move forward in the implementation of these rights to new goals of human happiness and well-being. And in reading these brilliant words,
Thank you. Now, it is my privilege to present to you the Governor of the State of Georgia, the Honorable Zell Miller.
Thank you, Joe. President Clinton, never-ending persistence, and gave him strength and courage he had not had before. And FDR, he was the commander-in-chief who marched freedom's forces to victory over fascism. A man for every American with the initiative to seize it. Yes, we Georgians loved FDR, and we love him still. After a half century in which his memory has been lying, that final wish was written right here in warm pleasure to present to you, ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Governor Miller, President Carter, other distinguished honorees, Commissioner Tanner, Mr. Barrett, Anna Roosevelt, and members of your family. Thank you so much for your wonderful remarks, and Arthur Schlesinger, thank you for yours. After the last three speakers, I see I don't have to worry about whether what I am about to say would be considered too political on this occasion. I'm delighted to be joined here by two members of Congress. Since Franklin Roosevelt died in this house behind me, many things have happened to our country. Each other or our leaders the way people felt then. But I think it's important just to take a moment to remember that even though Franklin Roosevelt was the architect of grand designs, he touched Americans, tens of millions of them, in a very personal way. They felt they knew him as their friend, their father, their uncle. They felt that he was doing all the things he was doing in Washington to help them. He wanted them to keep their farms, have their jobs, have the power line run out by the house. He wanted them to be able to have some security in their old age and see their children come home in peace from war. In my home state of Arkansas, the per capita income of the people was barely half the national average when Franklin Roosevelt began his work. And when he came there during the Depression, people were so poor that when they were preparing for him to come, there was literally not enough paint to paint the houses along his route. And so they all ice house back before we had refrigerators, and there really were ice boxes. He really thought Franklin Roosevelt cared about whether he had a job. And I never will forget the story he told me during the Depression when he came on the only time in his life when he was unable to buy my mother a new dress for Easter. And he wept because he did not have $2. He thought Franklin Roosevelt cared whether people like him could buy their children Easter outfits. That is the way people felt. And even into the 1960s, when as a young man I began to go from town to town working for other people who sought, in the face of fear and doubt and weariness, he showed we could literally will ourselves to overcome, as he had done and as has been already said so powerfully in his own life. He led us from the depths of economic despair, through a depression, to victory in the war, to the threshold of the promise of the post-war America. He unfortunately never to bring out both the problems and the potential of Americans. And he also changed America with a brilliant team. I saw here today a Deputy Chief of Staff here, Harold Ickes, whose father was President Roosevelt's Secretary of the Interior. Like me, this is his first visit to Warm Springs, but he has lived with the honor of that legacy for his entire life. A vision most clearly embodied in the GI Bill, which passed Congress in June of 1944, just a few days after D-Day, but before the end of the war, in Europe and education, to build strong families and good lives, and to build the nation's strongest economy ever, to change the face of America, and with it, to enable us to change the face of the world. The GI Bill helped to unleash a prosperity never before known. In the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s, all kinds of Americans benefited from growing. We divided growth from equality for the first time since Franklin Roosevelt became president. And it has caused a terrible slew of troubles for the American people over the last 15 to 20 years. In the 1980s, our response, since Arthur Schlesinger said President Roosevelt was for democratic capitalism, I think you could say that the response in the 1980s was conservative Keynesianism. That is, blame the government and blame the past, but deficit spend under the title of tax cuts did not go away. Instead, it got worse. Meanwhile, our investment in our people, the thing Franklin Roosevelt believed most in, began to slow down, even in education and training, because we decided that there was something wrong with public activity. The result? We intensified the splits in our economy, literally afraid that their lives are moving away from them. He would see a world of turbocharged capitalism in which it is possible to succeed economically, but millions of Americans don't know if they can hold their families and their communities and the disciplined rhythms of life together. He would see people who are confused saying, well, if there's an economic recovery, why haven't I felt government? And well, there ought to be. FDR would have loved this debate. He wouldn't be here defending everything he did 50 years ago. He wouldn't be for reliance and independence. You bet we should. He never meant for anybody, to become totally dependent on the government when they could do things for themselves. Should we walk away from the idea that America has important responsibilities at home and abroad, and we walk away from them at our peril? The answer would be from him a resounding no. My fellow Americans, Franklin Roosevelt found a way to raise America's incomes by making Americans more productive and making this economy work in the way that President Roosevelt dreamed it would. Everybody knows we have a government that we brought it down 3 years in a row for the first time since Mr. Truman was president. Everybody knows that. But let's not forget that we also have an education. The American dream will succeed or fail in the 21st century in direct proportion to our commitment to educate every person in the United States of America. And so I believe that what really works in life is when people get a hand up, not a handout. When Americans go up or down together. If you look at this great debate we're having in Washington with our twin deficits, the first operating surplus in nearly 30 years, except for interest on the debt, and we will do better. But we cannot do it at the expense of education. We cannot do it at the expense of education. There's a lot of talk about tax cuts. I say this, long run as well as the short run. We have to have a sense that our future depends upon the development of our people. That's why I say, if we're going to have a tax cut, we must give people some tax relief for the cost of education. That is the most important tax cut we can have, and I will insist upon it and will not support a legislative bill that does not have it. You know, Everybody wants to have more disposable income, but what we don't want to have is have both. I wish President Roosevelt were here. I wish you were just sort of on our shoulder to deride those who are cynical, those who are skeptical, those and just remember this. President Roosevelt died here, and they took his body on the train out. Imagine the voices that were singing in the churches. They were all ages, men and women, rich and poor, and that their future mattered in common. They were Americans first. They were Americans first. That was his contract with America. Let it be ours. Thank you, and God bless you.
You were hailed as the voice of the New South. In substance and in symbol, your administration brought common sense of a South Georgia turtle. You organized and executed your unprecedented campaign. You prepared yourself spiritually and intellectually with Spartan discipline, going directly to the people, gathering an army of supporters on the way, scoring unexpected victories, confronting tough and intractable issues. A towering force for decency and peace and social justice had emerged. You were now President of the United States. Vietnam and Watergate had divided the country and tarnished the presidency. You healed the wounds and restored our confidence. You confronted our social needs, strengthened the fairness of our tax system, and restored the self-esteem of our armed forces. Your work placed you in the front ranks of the conservators of our environment. You taught America the true value of energy resources. The poor saw you as their protector. Social security and medical care were brought. You sought controlled disarmament, taking bold initiatives to end the stalemate of the Cold War with the Soviet Union. You regularized our diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China, leading to breakthrough discussions on vital issues. Africa knew you as a friend, which we honor today. You beckon us to our highest values, seeking a world where the human spirit will prevail, where freedom and democracy will build a fortress for our hopes. You have understood and illuminated the great message of the four freedoms as Franklin Delano Roosevelt meant them, to your courage, to your compassion, and your indestructible spirit. The governor of Georgia, Zell Miller, and James Roosevelt, the grandson of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt, will present the Four Freedoms Medal to President Carter.
Recall our own experience on that day when the word came to us. I was a midshipman at the U.S. Naval Academy, and I cried. I cried because I'd lost my commander-in-chief, in whom I had full confidence. And I cried because I loved the man who had transformed my own life and the life of those around us. Today, most of the words spoken have been about our president, Franklin Roosevelt. He had a major impact on the South, mostly an impact of admiration and thanksgiving from a nation. She showed the courage of a moral and spiritual nature that too often is unrecognized. I listened with great attention as Anna read. He was concerned about the poor. He was not eternally grateful.
In 1975, your work as commentator had brought you the Pulitzer Prize. In 1981, you joined the Washington Post as a columnist, proving again that women can often do a better job than men. You have achieved a notable place in the annals of American journalism, joining such lustrous names as Ann O'Hare McCormick, Dorothy Thompson, Doris Fleeson, and Nellie Bly. You have succeeded because you have remained at heart a reporter, always on the scene with a notebook in hand, always covering the story. You have succeeded because you are a sparkling writer, adept at setting the scene, astute in analysis of character, filled with a sense of both the comedy and the pathos of political life. No doubt, it's the Irish heritage. And in perception and in wit, you are a worthy successor to Finley Peter Dunne. And you have succeeded because in the age that threatens to swing our society back to the dog-eat-dog morality of the Dickensian 19th century, you remain a steadfast, sometimes almost solitary, voice in defense of the heritage of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. That wonderful heritage of human concern and moral purpose and political realism and spiritual idealism that brought the Republic in triumph through depression and war, and that still provides the most solid and hopeful foundation for national achievement in the new century that lies darkly ahead. No one would have enjoyed your bold and independent writing more than Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And in his name, we honor you.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here to get this lovely medal, which I don't deserve. That's a whole other subject, which we'll leave for another day. And I have never been to Warm Springs before, and I am just overcome to be in this place, remembering the warmth and the grandeur of the presidency of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He came here. The reporters trooped into the Oval Office. And the publishers got nowhere with their demonizing. Here was this man who told them exactly what he was going to do, why, and so forth. And that was one of the reasons, I think, for his enormous success. Now, if I find my place here, I regret to say that present company, of course, accepted. The presidents who succeeded him did not wholly share his benign and wholesome view of the press. I can remember one president, a Democrat, I'm afraid to say, who begged to be praised for not sending reporters to jail who wrote articles critical of his conduct of the Vietnam War. They had something less than a total commitment to the First Amendment. Then I remember another president who drew up lists of his enemies. Franklin Roosevelt didn't have to do that. He had Hitler, which did him for a lifetime. Anyway, this other president of whom I speak drew up 2 lists, and I hope you won't think it vulgar of me to boast that I was on both of them. Lost my place again. Of course, the president was married to a newspaper woman, Eleanor Roosevelt. So, and now they had critics in the press, as everyone has touched upon it. Terrible, savage critics. And talk about, because lucky for us, he was a president who thought that he was never excused for making people think and making people laugh. And we thank God for him now, 50 years later. Thank you.
The freedom of every person to worship God in his own way everywhere in the world. On this 12th day of April 19, suffering, knowing their oppression, hearing their hope, and determining that they and all Americans would share the harvest of this blessed land. The ministry became your home and human rights became your crusade. In the small towns of the rural South, what you saw became a vision. In this rich land, how could such poverty be tolerated? How could children be denied education? How could the sick be abandoned? How could the bright optimism beaten savagely in St. Augustine? You kept marching to the old slave market of America's oldest city and led the prayer asking God to end slavery in all of its forms. The great legislative monuments of the movement, the Civil Rights Law and the Voting Rights Act, were the work of many, but your labors entitled you as an author. From Selma to Chicago, from Atlanta to Memphis, you were at Dr. King's side. And when the forces of evil claimed his life, you continued his heroic struggle. In the midst of the alienation and the bitterness and the confusion that followed his loss, you challenged those who would reverse what had been won so painfully. You were elected to Congress, the first African-American congressman from the Deep South since Reconstruction. You were a voice for change, change that would enhance life, peace, and justice. When President Carter invited you to be his ambassador to the United Nations, your talent, experience, and purpose came together. An eloquent speaker, you also knew how to listen. You understood the anguish and the aspiration of developing countries. To Ambassador Young.
Thank you very much. I was here in 1955 as a young pastor of a small congregational church down the road in Thomasville, Georgia. And I was so moved and so touched and inspired and horrified because lead the March of Dimes in the black community. And when I came back a few days later, I was told that I had done it wrong, that I went to the front door, and I wasn't supposed to go to the front door. I should. as a child of God, you could not accept that status. And it was the freedom of worship that let us know, in whatever circumstance in which we might have been born, that brothers and sisters. And it was the freedom of worship that helped us nonviolently transform this South and free not only those of us who were going to the back door, but we freed another young Georgian to be President of the United States. Of his grant is that Franklin Roosevelt's freedom of worship was not just going in the church. It was the planting of trees here and in Hyde Park. It was his escape from Washington, whether it was here, a Caribbean cruise, or returning to his family heritage.
Jay doesn't know how to do men. You only do him. Brothers and sisters, I am deeply honored to every day through thick and thin they carry out. Thank you.
Franklin and Delano Roosevelt, and Donald McHenry, whose own distinguished career has been devoted to international peace and social justice, will make the presentation to Elliot Richardson.
Thank you very much. President Clinton, President Carter, Governor Miller, you notice I will stop with the politicians. Ladies and gentlemen, I was with the 4th Infantry Division somewhere in southeastern Germany, and I heard that news with a sense of deep that made him a great political leader. It is important, I think, to remember that he was a master politician. And I've said it many times, and I think the career and the contributions of Franklin Delano Roosevelt represent exactly what that sentence means. I remember well enough as a boy the controversy that swirled around the New Deal and the hatreds that have been referred to, contributing to a solution that can in the long term broadly be supported and will in the long term contribute to the general interest.
on, and in the beauty of the lily, Christ was born across the sea. He had that glory in his boot.
Go forth from this place with new courage, following not the country's changing pulse, but hearkening instead to the noble beat of America's heart. Let us answer, growing peace, and may God bless the United States of America.